Hello, this lecture is about sociological theory, macro theory. So at the end of this lecture, you should be able to define theory. You should be able to talk about conflict theory and what structural and functionalism theory is. So theory is a statement of how and why specific facts are related. It explains social theories to explain social behavior in the real world. So in a previous lecture, I talked about how Peter Berger did not think public opinion polls with sociologies that you had to apply it to a theory. In this course, we talk about structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionists. So the first conflict theory is Marx and Engels, and on your left, if you're looking at the screen, is Engels, and on your right is Karl Marx. Now, Engels was a wealthy man. He supported Karl Marx all his entire life, and that kind of factor. Karl Marx is used as the number one social theorist that's still talked about today. And he lived from 1818 to 1883, and his major works were Das Kapital, Manifesto of the Communist Party. People think that he's a communist, but he never claimed that he was actually a communist at all. So some of the things that he talked about was asked the questions about what drives society and what makes it develop. So he looked at historical materialism, which is this idea of hunter-gathering as how society started out. Then we moved to agricultural. Then we moved to capitalism. And some Marxist people talk about that we moved to a post-capitalism society. Marx talked about how there's a social rank in each arrangement, and specifically about social classes. So you have the upper elite who are at the top, and then you have people working in poverty at the bottom, and everyone in between. So Marx talks about the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. The bourgeoisie are the ones who owns the means of production. They're the capitalists. And people own and operate factories and other businesses in pursuit of profits, and only just profits. So the book The Jungle, which you may have read in some humanities classes, looks at how the meat packing industry was all about the profit. They didn't care if people lost their hands or anything like that. Or if we were in College Station, Texas, and you owned a bar and you hired everyone out, you would be the bourgeoisie person in this example. And then proletariats are people who sell their productive labor for wages, the workers. So in the bar example, if you are working for the bar owner, you're a proletariat. Or people living in poverty are proletariats, or working poor are proletariats. They're working for their wages. They are living paycheck to paycheck. So Marx talks about who rules or dominates a society, and he talked about the bourgeoisie or the haves, those who have all the resources, and he talked about the correspondence principle, about those who control its base or primary means of survival, controls the superstructure of the culture and institutions. And so the example I give for the correspondence principle is, have you ever bought ripped up jeans? So if ripped up jeans come into fashion, right, and people spend $150 on a pair of jeans that ripped up, this would relate to the correspondence principle because they were controlling the base, they control the superstructure, they control the culture. Whereas a person who just naturally ripped up their jeans because they worked hard and they were on their knees and things like that, they're not controlling the superstructure, not controlling the base. So the third question is, what is the base of modern society? And the chief side of conflict for Marx and Engels is the economy. So the economy is the institution responsible for the production and exchange of goods and services. And Marx talks about economic determinism. All social interaction is based on, explained by the process of wealth production in society. So, for example, if you go to buy a car and you're wearing dirty clothes, but you're secretly wealthy, you're a multimillionaire and you're secretly wealthy, and the car salesperson tells you they don't think you're going to be able to buy the car, and they're looking at your clothes and things like that, and then you come back and you dressed all professional, right? Then you're going to be able to buy, the salesperson is going to have a different experience with you, right? They're going to be like, oh, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, you can buy this car, you don't need a loan, etc., etc., etc. So the fourth question, why might groups not join together for a change? And Marx said it was false consciousness and then class consciousness. So false consciousness can't really be scientifically proved. It means that the example is you cross the picket line and you don't side with the union members who are striking. Class consciousness means that workers recognize themselves as a class unified in opposition to capitalists and ultimately to capitalism itself. So you could say the strike that's going on in Hollywood right now with writers, actors, people who are makeup artists and all that kind of stuff, if they're all joining together and not crossing the picket line, they have class consciousness. If they cross the picket line, then Marx would argue they have false consciousness. So fifth concept is alienation. So how does Marx view alienation? And alienation is the experience of isolation and misery resulting from powerlessness. So workers, in Marx's opinion, are nothing more than a commodity, a source of labor, which can be hired and fired at will. So there's another concept related to alienation called the reserve army of workers. And so this example is where your boss, you say something like, that's unsafe, I'm not going to do that. Your boss says, you have to do that or I'm just going to fire you. You get fired and another person steps in and then does the unsafe activity. So there's always people milling about that can do your job, and so that's why you stay in the workforce, because you don't want other people to get your job. So here are 4 ways that capitalism alienates workers. First is alienation from the act of working. So previously, capitalism does not allow for workers to develop their human potential. Tasks are often repetitive and boring. Capitalism had turned human beings into machines. And so previously, during the agricultural phase of history, right, you would start off building a shoe and you would do the shoe all the way through to the end. Whereas now, if you're working in a factory that's building a shoe, you're going to do one repetitive action over and over again about that shoe, and you never necessarily see the shoe at the end. You have alienation from the products of work. One does not see the end product. Alienation from other workers. Industrial capitalism makes work competitive rather than cooperative. Little opportunity for human companionship. And you can see this in the book called Nickel and Dimed, where journalists, educated as a sociologist, went and worked low-paying jobs as like a maid and restaurant owner and stuff like that. Worked in Walmart. And Walmart and Starbucks particularly are against unions. And so a lot of times they will make sure that the workers don't talk to each other to find out if they're getting paid differently or what the work conditions are or things like that. And then the 4th way is alienation from human potential. Industrial capitalism distorts activity that should express the best qualities in human beings into a dull and dehumanizing experience. So a second theorist that we're going to spend a lot of time this semester talking about is Max Weber. So the W is a V because German. So that is a picture of Max Weber on the screen. Max Weber married their cousin, and she was a famous feminist during her time. He also had quite a few meltdowns, or not meltdowns, mental health breaks. And he would often come to the United States to travel when he felt like his mental health was decreasing. So his concepts are, there's a distinction between the objective world and the subjective world. So there's an external world versus a perceived world. And this external world may be different than the perceived world. So if he was talking to Karl Marx at the same time, he would say, okay, Karl Marx, you're all about the social hierarchy and social class and the bourgeoisie and the proletariats and the capitalism. So Max Weber said, culture makes a difference. So the social structure doesn't always determine the culture, and sometimes culture influences social structure. So there's supposed to be arrows going back and forth between the social structure and culture. That says that if culture changes, this influences social structure, and if social structure changes, this could influence the culture. So the main difference is that Max Weber is adding culture and social structure, whereas Karl Marx was all about capitalism is evil. That was Karl Marx's ideas. So, therefore, in order to understand society, we must first understand the social action of individuals. And so here are some concepts for session: studying and interpreting behaviors and attitudes from the perspective of the actor. We also can see that in research methodology, where people are like standing in the subject's shoes. An ideal type. So Weber spent a lot of time in their books talking about ideal types, or how a bureaucracy should be this, and laying out those kinds of factors. Ideal types are comparing the object with the subjected is a useful tool of investigation. So, for example, Weber wrote about bureaucracies, and so Max Weber would talk about here's the ideal type of bureaucracy, and then compare it to like another bureaucracy and say, well, this is how they're failing. So what is the dominant culture theme of modern human society? Weber says rationalization and demystification. So rationalization is the increase of emphasis on logical assessments and interpretations. So you always want to adopt the latest technology. McDonald's. So if I walk into a McDonald's in Australia, Sydney, Australia, I should be able to get the same stuff. The food should all taste the same than our DeKalb McDonald's, right? So this is all rationalization. Now, currently, George Ritzer has written numerous contemporary books about McDonald's and the McDonaldization of society, and how you lose authentic items by having everything like a McDonald's. And wrote about the demystification. Max Weber wrote about the demystification, the erosion of spiritual meaning in the world, and he wrote about this in the spirit of the Protestant ethic. Now, Max Weber was raised by Calvinist parents, which meant that you were preordained to go to heaven, and if you weren't a chosen one, then you weren't going to heaven. It is suggested that his mother was very authoritarian, and would often have him pray for hours at a time on his knees, aspects like this. So it's not shocking that at the spirit of the Protestant ethic, where you're using rationalization and trying to create more money and more money, that this is coming out of what he argues is the Protestant ethic about hard work and create more money. So Weber categorized society in the following ways. There were traditional members of pre-industrial societies. So he meant sentiments and beliefs passed from generation to generation, and traditional people are guided by the past. So if your dad was a cabinet maker, you're going to become a cabinet maker because that's tradition, right? You're passing it along. Whereas rational people in industrial capitalist societies, rationality is deliberate, matter-of-fact calculation, the most efficient means to accomplish a particular task. Sentiment has no place. Think and act on the basis of present and future consequences, evaluating jobs, schooling, and even relationships. So I think some of you would suggest that we basically are living in a rational society right now, where I'm evaluating your schoolwork and your assignments. You might think about how you can get higher up relationships with more powerful people, those kind of aspects. And so capitalism, Weber considered industrial capitalism the essence of rationality, because capitalists pursue profit in whatever ways they can, whereas Marx believed that capitalism was irrational because it failed to meet the basic needs of most of the people. And again, Weber wrote the Protestant ethic in the spirit of capitalism, which you may or may have not read in some of your classes, previous classes. So we have a third conflict theorist, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So she would be talking at Marx and Weber, and she was like, wait a minute. That's all good that you have capitalism and you have rationality, but you're forgetting about the women question. So Karl Marx would never entertain any questions about gender or race and ethnicity. Marxist concepts were all about social class and hierarchy and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, as we just saw from Weber, his is about rationality and that kind of stuff. So Perkins Gilman, and you may have read the Yellow Wallpaper in one of your humanities courses, talks about individuals have different experiences within the economy and they participate in the economy differently. So during Perkins Gilman time, for example, women were cooking, cleaning the house, raising the children, whereas men were in the paid labor force. And so Marx and Weber would say, okay, yeah, so what? So what Perkins Gilman said back to them was, women are just as important in maintaining resources in capitalistic society. So they make valuable contributions that don't always get paid for. And not being paid leads to social powerlessness. So, for example, Brady Bunch. And maybe some of you have not seen Brady Bunch. But if you haven't, it's a step family comes together. There's 3 boys and 3 girls. The father is an architect. He makes a house with 3 bedrooms, which I always found surprising. But you never see Carol Brady doing any paid labor force. But she would be setting up the appointments, doing the emotional labor for the kids. Her and Alice, the maid, housekeeper, would be cleaning house, going to the school activities and things like that. So there's a lot of work that isn't necessarily paid that contributes to the economy. If you have a heterosexual marriage, right? So the woman might be setting up the appointments for the husband to get his dentist appointment, and making sure that he doesn't have a dentist appointment during work hours. This all contributes to the economy, but women aren't paid for it. So there was an argument at the time that women are not really suited for participation in the economy. Perkins Gilman said, if that's so, then men, you should go work in the home and do it themselves, and that working at home for unpaid labor is hard work. So a fourth conflict theorist is W.E.B. Du Bois, and there's a picture of him later in life on the screen. So again, Du Bois would be talking in opposition or slightly askewed from Marx and Weber and Perkins Gilman, and what Du Bois added was social interaction. So Du Bois said we have cultural beliefs, but when they act on these beliefs is when something happens. So we're critiquing the existing structure or just act the same, and the importance of the cultural ideas. So Du Bois is more along with Weber than Marx. I should also add that Du Bois was a workaholic. Was in Ghana when he died. Had remarried. And there's some discussion about first wife and daughter were not paid attention to very much. That kind of stuff. So second idea is cultural ideas affecting social change, where again the other previous people didn't talk about social change at all. So Du Bois adds social identity, which is called double consciousness. Ideas of ourselves, but based on position, make up their minds about a group. So in one of Du Bois's books, Du Bois talks about a train, and you had the curtain between the white side of the train and the black side of the train when it was segregated. And Du Bois talks about African Americans being able to know everything about white culture and white families and who's having an affair and all that kind of stuff, but also knowing about their own black culture within. So they have double consciousness, right? They know both sides of those cultures. So structural functionalism. So we're now away from conflict theorist. And there's a picture of Durkheim. And so Durkheim lived around when years were changing, so another social change. And Durkheim's concepts are that society is more than the sum of its parts. It exists as a complex organism rooted in our collective life. If you read Durkheim's work, he spends a lot of time talking about the body and how, like, if you chop off the hand, then the body doesn't function. So Durkheim said the question about what is the source of social order. So there was two factors: social solidarity. Society is held together by a collective consciousness, and a collective consciousness is a set of commonly held beliefs or rules that govern social behavior. So the question about what influences solidarity, how does it change, what are the consequences? Durkheim has two ideas about solidarity. The first one is mechanical. Solidarity springs from sameness of population societies with little or no differentiation. And this is equivalent to Weber's traditional categories of society. So the cabinet maker, their children become cabinet makers, that kind of stuff. And organic is solidarity-based interdependence of diverse population within diverse societies. People stick together because they need each other. They're interdependent. So, for example, I can't build a cabinet, so I might commission someone to build a cabinet, and I need that person to build the cabinets, but I might be doing some other factor, so something else that they might need in the future. So both types of these solidarities give rise to social facts, which are concrete ways of acting, norms, and institutions that emanate from the collective consciousness. So when there's no solidarity, you have anomie, which is normalness. So social change produces disequilibrium or uncertainty about belonging. So this increases suicide. So if you're least tied in society, the least regulated categories of people suffer the highest rates of suicide. So Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, millionaires who won their dollars from the lottery. You see an increase in suicide among lottery winners because the norms have changed, right? They don't have any new norms because they haven't been raised up in wealth. So we see Durkheim argues that in modern society that increases in anomie and condition in which society provides little moral guidance to individual, and he thought it was almost chaos. So other examples of modern society and increase in anomie is sudden fame. It disrupts established norms and values, and it breaks down society's support and regulation of an individual.